Good afternoon, and welcome to the Carolina Codecast, the official podcast of the Carolina Code Conference. I'm your host, Barry Jones, and with me today is Eric Burden. Say hello, Eric.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell us about yourself. What are you up to these days? Where are you living? What are you doing for work?
I live here in beautiful Pickens, South Carolina, which is west of Greenville. We are a little bit closer to the higher elevations, which I enjoy. For those of you who are familiar with the area, we are in the backyard of Table Rock State Park, which is my absolute favorite morning exercise when I can get out there. Just taking a trip, up and down that mountain is it's good for me.
Yeah, that absolutely is. I love that area over there because I'm in Easley, so I'm really close to you as it is. And so
nice.
Anytime that we get a chance to drive up towards Pumpkintown or to Pickens, or even go over to Table Rock and kind of get in that area near the base of the mountains, going up to Camp Greenville, to Pretty Place, and any of that stuff, it's a beautiful drive in general. And I briefly worked for a company in Brevard, North Carolina, where it was just straight across that mountain anytime we wanted to go and meet up. And I always look forward just to the trip because it's just such a pretty area.
Yes, and that drive, sort of like through, the winding roads up the mountain into North Carolina from here is absolutely gorgeous, especially this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long have you been in Pickens?
My family and I moved to Pickens in June of last year. So almost a year and a half now. We've been in Pickens. Previously, we were in Memphis, Tennessee, where my wife was finishing her PhD at the University of Memphis.
All right.
Yeah, and she finished. She's good. And we after she finished, she had the distinction of defending her PhD dissertation the week before the city of Memphis shut down for COVID-19.
Oh God!
So we hung out in Memphis for a while. She graduated with her PhD and was looking for professor roles, and those did not happen immediately into the pandemic. Right, that sort of went away. So we stayed there for a while. She actually did a visiting professorship at University of Memphis. So it worked out fine. But we were in a position where sort of up until that moment, we had always known my wife, she's going to graduate, and, university jobs are not the sort of thing that you've got 12 different universities hiring in the same city, right? And you go pick one. We were going to move. And so we always knew we were going to move. And at that point, she was done, and we were deciding, where are we going to move based on where she gets a job.
Right.
She ended up finding a remote job because that also became a thing quite a bit more during the pandemic.
That is something I didn't know about. They have remote professor jobs now?
So interestingly enough, she did not start off as a professor. She found a job with the University of Michigan in their English, it's Michigan language assessment. So they make and run English language testing for places all over the world.
Interesting.
So if anybody's coming into your university and they need to take like an English language placement test, it's probably one of their tests.
All right, that's interesting.
Yeah. So she was remote and I was remote, and we wanted to leave. So there was a spreadsheet involved, and Pickens won.
So how did Pickens win? Now I'm curious. What were your big factors for Pickens?
So we both grew up in the state of Mississippi.
Okay.
And so a lot of our criteria for where we want to live permanently with our kids were things like, we liked affordability. We liked living not where we could, throw things at our neighbor, or our neighbor could throw things at us, depending on the mood.
I can appreciate that.
So a little bit more space, obviously cost of living, education for the kids was a big thing for us, finding somewhere where we could, plug into a community and get them a good education.
Absolutely.
Was huge. Weather was also a big thing. Having grown up in the deep South, we knew how much humidity we didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
And, we To be fair, I do still hear people talk about humidity here in the upstate.
Oh,
It's
no.
not bad, guy.
No.
It's really not bad at all.
I grew up in Florence, South Carolina.
There you
I
go.
know humidity. Coming up here,
Absolutely.
it's the air's thin comparatively up here.
Absolutely.
But
so yeah, it just had all the combination of we were able to find a house in our price range. We obviously found a beautiful place to live, and we really enjoyed it. And as it turns out, the internet service here for our remote work is incredible. We're on the Blue Ridge fiber.
Oh, that's right.
So we're sitting at like 500 up and down.
Nice. Yeah, we finally got AT&T fiber in my neighborhood like 5 months ago. And honestly, I can't imagine doing this podcast without having that much upload bandwidth. Because when I was just limited to my 10 meg upload, it would have taken me all day just to upload the video.
Right? Interestingly enough, both our internet is more than an order of magnitude better than it was when we lived in a suburb of Memphis. And the power stays on more,
that is true.
more regularly.
Well, so you mentioned weather, and I never expect to talk about something like weather on this podcast, but I have been telling my wife for years that this Easley, Clemson, Pickens area, this little corner of South Carolina right here, is this weird like weather safe zone. Because from somebody, I've lived in Easley for 20 years, so I'm 10 miles from you, and I've been just kind of watching this phenomenon for years. What happens is that you're far enough inland that when a hurricane comes on the coast, it's dead by the time it gets here. In order for any really bad weather to hit, it has to come up from the Gulf and then stay on this side of the mountains. The bad snow weather that comes through, it always comes in from the northwest side, and the mountains absorb all of it. I mean, at worst, we'll get like a couple days, maybe 2 or 3 days of snow per year in a heavy year, even if you have a heavy snow. But all the really bad weather gets absorbed by those mountains. And so between the mountains that are right behind you and the distance inland that we are from everything else, it's always good weather here. And it's
absolutely.
Maybe I shouldn't be advertising but
right. No, it really is. And it's funny. So, one of our columns on our spreadsheet, right, was like tornado occurrence.
Yeah.
Right. And again, we were Mississippi and then Memphis. We moved in June. That year, we had been in the hallway multiple times with tornado sirens, in Memphis. And of course, at that point, you got to wake up the kids, go get the hamsters, make sure all the people and pets are in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
There was one night that year where we were up twice with tornado sirens. So, did the whole thing, put everybody back to bed, and then did it again. And then we moved, and, obviously, internet tells you one thing in terms of research, and we start talking to people in the local area, and we're like, okay, so how often do you guys have like tornadoes? Like I know what the data says, but let me hear from you. And when people had to stop and think, I knew we had made a good decision.
Nice. Well, I'm going to attempt to steer this back onto code-related topics for a minute, just for sake of the audience. But so, you ended up moving here from Memphis, and you kind of quickly discovered the conference. I know you attended the Carolina Code Conference this year. You submitted a talk as well, and we weren't able to get you in, but it was a talk on oh gosh, what was it called?
Falling in love with iterators.
That was it. And you kind of covered them across multiple languages. So you wasted no time getting here and kind of getting plugged into the local tech community with Hack Greenville and everything else as well. Were you plugged into the community in Memphis when you were there?
I absolutely was. And in fact, I still am.
Oh, that's good.
Quite a bit. So there's an organization, it's a nonprofit out of Memphis called Code Connector. And it's essentially an online community. Most of it lives in a Slack instance. That is, you're right. It's dedicated to working with people who are looking at specifically making a career change into tech.
Right.
Typically from underserved communities,
Nice.
which is a big part of the Memphis population. When I lived in Memphis, when we first moved, I actually worked for the United Way there, and so the whole like nonprofit sector is kind of my home.
Really?
And absolutely, yeah. And so that was, I found Code Connector again during the pandemic because I was at home. And I've been a technology professional in non-technology settings for a while, and so the experience of like not having people you work with to talk to about like, oh, here's the code I wrote today, or here's the framework that I'm struggling with, or why did this person who wrote this code for me make such stupid decisions? Oh wait, turns out it was me. Right, like those conversations were things I was used to not having a lot of. And then when we all moved home, my wife quickly got tired of me. Let's just be honest. And so I started, looking for, well, maybe I can find some of these online meetups that I can talk to other people who will not get tired as quickly of that conversation.
Right.
And Code Connector was that place. And so we run a number of meetups, a lot of stuff around like user interface design, having outside speakers come in. And then I, along with a few of my other friends, host a regular meetup called the Coding Dojo, which is, it's a name.
Good name.
And
Good name.
Absolutely. And the point of that is
Cobra Kai
to work with, I'm not even sure. It was one of the other guys recommended it, and the rest of us were like, we have nothing better. This is going to work.
That's how a lot of them happen.
And it's about helping people train for the whiteboard interviews.
Oh, nice.
In part because like the theory is that it's like public speaking, except it's enough not like public speaking that if you don't practice doing the coding and talking about code and talking through algorithms and problems and things in front of other people, you're not going to be good at it, and no one is.
Yeah.
Unless you've spent some time, right, thinking about it, practicing, doing it in front of other people. That's how you get better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we bring in a new someone who's relatively new, making a transition every month. And we walk them through that process of, writing out a solution in pseudocode, thinking it through from like that high level perspective that doesn't have anything to do with what your actual syntax is going to look like.
Yeah. Pseudocode is hard for a lot of people.
It is hard. But what's brilliant though is that most of the time, we walk it through, we talk it through, we get to that pseudocode, and then the presenter, the driver, they share their screen. They've got usually VS Code pulled up. And then we can just sit back and read the pseudocode to them. And it's like, it flows into the syntax. And we often get that experience at the end. We're like, oh my gosh, this works. Like the first time.
That's interesting.
Like, oh, yeah.
I'd actually love to see that demonstrated. I think there's a lot of people that would benefit from that.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to send you an invite.
Nice.
After we hop off.
Yeah, absolutely.
But of course, and we have people. It's a Memphis based organization, but it's mostly virtual. So we have folks from all over.
Nice.
Inside and outside the U.S. These days.
Now, although the name is similar, we're not affiliated with the Code School at all, with the conference and the cast. But the Carolina Code School is always looking at bringing people in who typically are doing career changes, that when they are going through their boot camp programs. And I know one of the things that they're always trying to really prepare them for is making sure that they're ready for the interviews. And it'd be, I would imagine that just meeting some people over there and kind of talking through what you did there would potentially be beneficial for a lot of the area over here too.
Absolutely. And I would love to have that conversation. If nothing else, just extend the invitation to come and just sit in, right? Because I think it's good it's certainly good for the person who's getting the reps in, getting the practice, but it's also good for everyone else to like see, okay, this other person is doing this, right? Like there are other people like me who are making this change. It's not just a world full of, dudes with huge beards that speak Linux.
Yep.
this is open to me.
Yep, absolutely. And that's great work to do. So what got you involved with the United Way in the first place? Is Code Connector through United Way?
So it's actually not. My career path is a weird one. So I'll start by saying right now, right. Right now, I am my job title is IT Senior Principal Consultant with NTT Data Services.
Okay.
And what I do there is I serve as the project management technical lead for data conversion and data reporting for the Arkansas Child Welfare Information System project. So the state of Arkansas is migrating to a more modern child welfare information system, and we are managing that project for them. And I sit on the database, which is where I'm comfortable.
Right.
But that is the result. Right. That's the result of like a sort of a long, slow migration, because my first job out of college was as a frontline social worker.
Wow. That is a shift.
I started out, right. So I didn't have a CS degree. I had actually I had a chemistry degree.
So chemistry degree, frontline social worker to data analyst or data migration specialist.
Yeah, well, like I said, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do with life. But, I started out, I was working for a nonprofit. I was working with teenagers who were transitioning out of foster care. Wow. And for these folks, like there's a lot of need there, because when I think about like my transition, into adulthood, I had a lot of help.
Yeah.
And a lot of support, both of all kinds. And these kids, these young people, a lot of times they don't. And so our job was trying to get them ready. And what I noticed in doing that work was that there were a lot of things that we were doing in just a real like beat around the bush kind of way. I'll give you an example, right? So we would at the end of every month, every specialist across the state would go to their office and spend the entire day compiling all of their records for the month into a report, into an Excel spreadsheet, and then sending that to the main office. And then the main office would take that Excel spreadsheet and then compile it. So, real quick, efficiency was like, well, what if I could just put my data into an Excel spreadsheet all along the way and then just have macros to run it at the end of the month?
Yeah.
Right. So an entire day's worth of work turns into like 30 minutes worth of work. And of course, I kept this to myself for a while because it was nice having the entire day.
Yep.
But eventually, word got out and this spreads around. And so like that was honestly kind of step one. And then from there, you get a reputation for being like, oh, Eric's the tech guy in our org. So we'll talk to him about stuff. And, you just, to be fair, right, the nonprofit sector tends to be behind the private sector just in terms of technology across the board, because it's expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard to convince donors to give for your new computer system. That's not what motivates people to give.
Right. I mean,
the nonprofits, right?
You could probably say a lot of people in nonprofits, the volunteers who were there, a lot of times people think about going in just to work with their hands or actually just to, they're giving of their time. They're not necessarily thinking, all right, well, I'm giving of my time, so how can I be more efficient with it?
Right. How can I contribute to the infrastructure of my favorite nonprofit? Like,
exactly.
That's just not a thought, and it makes total sense. But the result is that there tend to be a lot of organizational inefficiencies that are just caused by, being behind the curve in technology. And so I just kept finding opportunities to learn new technology and then to apply it to the work I was doing and to make, at least the workplace better for the people who were there. And I realized that as much as I loved, working directly with the folks that we were working with, I realized I was doing more good for them by improving the workplace for everybody else like me.
Yep.
And so, we went from there to just, again, picking up more things. I went to work for the state of Mississippi, ended up as the data reporting division director for the state child welfare agency there. We built out the state's reporting system for the state. So we built a custom application to pull data out of their legacy database, which was an database server, like down in the basement of one of the state buildings, and display it for the social workers across the state to say, okay, this is what I need to be working on this week in order to make sure that we're, following all the policy and meeting the needs of all the kids on my caseload.
Yeah. Because the policies don't get any smaller.
No, they do not, or any less complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how you could navigate some of that stuff without having the right software in place.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
that's and then
journey right there, though. I mean, that's fantastic work that you're doing. It's wonderful that you have such a heart for service.
It's really the thing that keeps me going. And so, like, even now, right? Like, I'm working remote as a consultant. We pick up projects everywhere. I'm still child welfare focused. I'm still working on this child welfare project, and every once in a while, I have to stop and remind myself that how important this work is.
Yeah.
Because you can get disconnected from it.
Oh yeah,
sort of sitting here in the living room.
And there's also there's certain areas where a lot of people coming in aren't going to necessarily know what they're doing or how to approach the situation. Like I don't talk about this a lot, but years ago in my Sunday school class, there was a kid in my Sunday school class who needed some extra guidance. He came out of a similar background, kind of left home, and we'll just go with that, and had been kind of taken in from people at the church, was working and whatnot, just needed some advice. And so I tried going through and giving him advice and coaching him through everything and doing what I could, but I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know how to communicate effectively. I didn't know what he would be able to relate to. I tried to just relate to him like I would with anybody else, but in the end, after 6 months of it, I didn't do a very good job, and I just kind of felt like I could have done more, I should have done more, or whatever else. And I have no idea what he's doing now, but I worry about him all the time. And and it's I wasn't sure if it was just communication style, or if you need more people involved to try to make sure that everything is structured properly, or what. Like in Pickens and in Easley, we've got the Dream Center, which is a wonderful organization, and we tried to get him in with the Dream Center at one point to kind of bridge that gap, but they didn't have any room at the time. But as far as I know now, he was always a really hard worker. I mean, he was always great at the job that I think he ended up working with HVAC companies for a while, but it was really tough, and just trying to relate to him at a level that he could. And then you think about how, growing up, I had my parents. If I didn't know what to do, I asked my parents. He didn't have that kind of system. And he wasn't, he didn't even know how to ask questions in a lot of cases. Like if it wasn't being told directly to him, like, you need to go do this, he didn't know, what do I need to go do?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's stuff you really take for granted. And anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I can tell you, right, as somebody who's done work with teenagers professionally, you pour everything into them, right? Your success rate is what it's going to be sometimes. But also, like, I think, a lot of times too, the impact that you get to have, you don't ever get to see the full result of that.
That's probably true too.
It makes a difference. And sometimes you're pushing up a hill that's been growing somebody's whole life.
Yeah.
And, you and I, right, like, it sounds like come from stable backgrounds with stable families and whatnot. Like, the top of that hill looks different sometimes. Like, success is in the eye of the beholder a lot of times. And, I've had, you have people come back and be like, hey, I'm doing this, that, or the other thing. And you think to yourself, like, man, I want it better for you, but they're super excited.
Yeah, that's true.
So I wouldn't get down on it, right? I think what you were doing, like trying to make a difference there, that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, doesn't stop me from thinking about it though. but I appreciate
That's
it.
fair.
Yeah.
Well, and and to lighten it up a little bit, right? Like that's that experience of having been where the social workers sit and of going through like some of that emotional work.
Yeah.
Right. Of knowing that like you're giving your best, and you're wanting the best for these children, and sometimes you're not going to get it, and sometimes things are going to go out of your control. Like having had those experiences, I'm able to go into rooms with social workers now and talk to them about like technology, talk to them about the system that we're developing, talk to them about these, reports. And right, you think about like reports, it's looking at data on a screen, in a way that is letting them know that, hey, we understand where you're coming from, and what we're not doing is creating more hurdles for you to jump over, more hoops for you to jump through. We're not making your job harder. These are tools to meet you where you are and to give you more of your time and energy back to do that emotional work, which is why a lot of people get into social services careers in the first place, because they really want to do that connecting. They want to pour into those clients. They don't want to go back and document,
Absolutely.
all day long.
And so this is, and so from a software standpoint, the type of stuff we're talking about is the work that you did with Code Connector and United Way, right?
Right.
And so what does NTT do?
So NTT, we're well, and that's what I'm doing now with the state of Arkansas.
Okay, great.
With NTT, so we do consulting with state and federal governments, and other business to business. I'm in the government consulting and accountability sort of wing.
Okay.
So right now I'm working with the state of Arkansas. When this project's over, I may go to Colorado or Tennessee and work on similar projects. We have several child welfare projects coming online, but we also do like Medicaid projects, health and human services kind of projects with different states.
Okay. All right. And so with with them, if you just glance at your LinkedIn, you're going to see a lot of data analysis stuff really quick. You're going to see SQL, R, Julia, Rust. So how much of that are you using on a daily basis? How did you get into all those? What do you use them for? And I hear about R and Julia a lot. I've never used them, and I'm always kind of trying to better understand what the use case is for those languages.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you, when I was working for the state of Mississippi, I learned R because we were working on data reporting for the state, and we had SQL developers on staff, which is actually kind of a rarity for a state child welfare system. And they were great. They had no idea about anything that had to do with actually doing social work, or even some of the terminology that people use. So I would constantly be in the middle of, this director is asked for this information from the SQL developers, and the SQL developers would give them exactly what they asked for, exactly the way they asked for it, and it wasn't what they meant. Right. And you'd go through cycles of this. So I'd be in the middle of that. And and there were, eventually I convinced them. I was like, hey guys, if you'll just give me like read access to the database, I'll be able to answer some of these questions without having to come to you. And they did, and it was great. And I learned that SQL is hard, especially like writing complex SQL queries was hard. And I was, working on learning that technology, and a friend of mine said, hey, have you heard of this? There's a programming language called R. And I know, you're familiar with like writing normal code as opposed to SQL, which is clearly not normal code.
I'm plenty familiar with SQL too.
And he's like, maybe that'll help you. And it really did. So I was able to, essentially go to the database, drop a table out, or not drop a table, export a table.
Right.
And then write my code in R to do my analysis. Now, eventually I got better at SQL. Exposure helps.
Yeah.
But that was the introduction. And so R is a programming language. If you've not used it before, it is very much a language where A table of data is a first-class citizen. That is a data type built into the standard library.
Okay.
It's called a data frame. It's the thing that, if you're familiar with like the pandas library for Python.
Just for sake of the podcast, assume I'm not.
Okay, so pandas is a Python library to make it easy to work with tabular data, right? And you've got this whole library built out for that. It's built into the R language.
Okay.
So it is it's very much a first class citizen, and it makes it very easy to write syntax that deals with tables of data in a sort of top down, like, take this data table, do this, do this, do this, do this, mutate these columns, aggregate with these grouping columns, filter on this criteria, spit out a result.
Okay.
And it's honestly, if and I recommend this to people, like I mentioned my wife is an academic. I work with occasionally people who come from that academic background, who are used to doing, or like a business analyst background, who are used to doing lots of work in Excel, and like writing these complex VLOOKUPs and things. Like, you would be the perfect person to learn R, because you're essentially doing the things that you would normally do in Excel, typically in a non-destructive way. So you take your data in, write your script, get data out. Right. As opposed to like, Excel's a wonderful tool. I get in trouble for like, talking down about Excel. Excel's a wonderful tool until you need to do something twice. Right. And if you're ever in the position where you've created a report in Excel and they're like, great, this is awesome, can I get it for the next month too? And you realize like you've got to go through and like repeat all these steps, and maybe you dropped some columns, maybe you deduplicated some things, and you have to do all those things exactly the same order again. You start to wish for a scripting language, and R is just really great for kind of automating those kinds of tasks.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. It's one of those things of, as a programmer, because I know how to write code, I would much rather have a CSV and then just run it through some Ruby code or something like that to do the transformations or changes that I want to do, rather than sitting down and trying to figure out how to do it in Excel. But for people that don't have that background and they get into Excel, there's a lot of stuff you can do with Excel, and there's a lot of businesses that run on Excel. And so it's hard to bag on it too much, because the fact that they made something that's so approachable for so many people, they can accomplish everything it does. It is impressive, and it's always interesting to try to find those gaps. Like I was there's a whole other subset of technology called business process management tools, and it's a standard for basically automating business processes and connecting things together, and basically converting things from being diagrammed to automating each step of it and connecting the processes with either people or automations and communication along the way. And you can diagram how entire business process flows go. And it's really, really helpful, but it's in this weird place where if you show a programmer the problem, they're not going to reach for this tool. They're going to just go code it.
Right.
And if you show a business person the problem, they're going to ask a programmer to go solve it, rather than bringing in the tool to diagram it out and go, hey, we can pull it all in. And it's a very interesting spot for a solution. And then there's just the psychological dynamic of who approaches going to the problem that way. But
right, absolutely.
Yeah. So
then you only get the benefit after, right? Yeah. Like after you take on sort of the pain of implementing it, the benefit comes later. And so, yeah, it's hard to get over that hump.
Absolutely. So, all right. So you learned R, and I know are R and Julia similar languages? Do they do kind of the same thing?
Julia has a similar goal or similar aim to R. It's a newer language, so R is actually pretty old.
Okay.
It's about it came out about the same time as Python did originally.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it's been around for a while, and again, it's pretty popular in academic settings. Julia is very new. I don't remember the exact year. It comes out of MIT, and it's aimed at solving the what they call the two language problem, where and this is actually why I know Rust, is because of the two language problem, which is you can write code, dynamic code in R or Python that will do what you want. You can be very expressive. You can't be fast,
right?
In raw. R, because it's not fast. It's a dynamic interpreted language. So when you want to do something fast, you drop down and you write your library in a statically compiled language, typically like a C or a C++ or a Rust.
Okay. I've actually seen like a Rust data frame library that is used by other languages to hook into it, not just R, but I think I've actually seen extensions for like Elixir and Ruby as well.
Is it Arrow?
I'd have to go look it up now.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a big Apache project.
You keep talking. I'm going to look it up real quick.
Yeah. And so the point of Julia, though, is that you don't have to do that. You write your Julia code and it gets JIT compiled. And so the first time it like takes forever to compile. And then after that, it runs at compiled language speed. But you get some of the expressiveness of a dynamic language. Julia is actually a lot of fun to write. I really don't use it much professionally. Honestly, because it's sort of that like tool problem. I've been working in R for so long that any problem that I would use Julia on, I already know how to solve it more easily for me in R. And so I often will just reach for that instead. It's a lot of fun to write code in. It's a great language.
Now I remember we actually had somebody submit one of the code header challenge entries with R. Was that you?
That was probably me.
Okay. That makes sense. We're going to be doing the code header challenge again this year too for the 2024 conference. So I'll be looking forward to seeing, R and Julia entries for that. I did look up what I was thinking about, and it's a library called Polars.
Polars, yeah. Same guy who made pandas, actually.
Okay.
And also, I'm pretty sure he's I would bet money that's Arrow under the hood, because I think it's Wes McKinney. Okay. Right.
I remember seeing there was an Elixir library that basically uses Polars under the hood, and if I remembered right, because I've spent a lot of time working with Elixir, and Elixir is a language that's very good at doing a lot of things at the same time. It's not as efficient at doing straight line stuff. It's just that's built for managing a lot of things going, like millions of things going at the same time in parallel efficiently. But straight line benchmarks, it's never going to win. And so typically a lot of Elixir developers are used to using a NIF to call out to Rust because of the safety guarantees that you get with Rust. It lets them, it makes them more willing to trust it. And so you end up seeing a lot of Elixir developers using Rust-based libraries for performance extensions and stuff like this. And so that's why it came across my radar.
That makes total sense. I'll tell you, I actually started because I had some code that just took forever to run. I was doing what amounted to date corrections in R based on things people type into spreadsheets, right?
Yeah.
And so you just every cell might be different than the one before it, and so it was just looping over the entire thing. You weren't getting any of the goodness of any of the already underlying libraries. And so it was really painfully slow. So I was like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to write my own underlying implementation of this. So I tried to do it in C. I was not a fan of that, mostly because it kept seg faulting and not telling me why.
Yeah. That's not something I would have reached for.
No. Well, see, yeah, like and then I reached for C++, and it was complicated. And then, I was like, okay, these are not fun. What else is there? And Rust was available. There's actually a project to make it relatively easy to write R libraries in Rust. They do some of the bindings together. It's an open source project.
Okay.
That I've ended up actually doing a little bit of work on, not a lot, but a little bit. And it was just honestly, like if you hear anybody talk about writing code in Rust, one of the things that you'll always hear is the quality of the error messages that you get from Rust. And that was the game changer, because coming back across out of the Rust code and into the R ecosystem, it brought those error messages with it. And so when things broke, I at least knew why, and I could do something about it.
I like that.
And that was a much better experience.
So you're clearly a polyglot developer. and you've learned all these different languages, and you've some of them you've learned from work to solve different problems that you've come across. Is there any particular annual event that has inspired you to learn languages?
Why, now that you ask, we're coming into December, and one of my absolute favorite things is Advent of Code.
All right.
So that'll start December
So
1st.
what is Advent
And
of Code?
for anyone, I was right. For anybody who's not heard, Advent of Code is a yearly collection of coding puzzles, right? You can think of like Code Wars or Leet Code kind of
Okay.
puzzles, right? That run the gamut from relatively simple, like, summing things over a list, to, I think one year there was 3D transformations of points in space
Oh wow.
in multiple ways. Yeah, it gets kind of gnarly toward the end sometimes. And it's built in the spirit of an Advent calendar. So each day through the first 25 days of December, there's a new puzzle released, sort of like opening up your Advent calendar. And instead of
Yeah.
chocolate, you get like a brain teaser in code.
Nice.
And it's something actually I started doing it in 2020. And I ended up actually enjoying it so much that I've now gone back and done, I think they started in 2015. So I've gone back and done the years from 2015 to 2022.
Oh wow.
And am very much looking forward to this year. I've used Advent of Code as sort of a springboard to learn a couple of different programming languages, including Julia and Rust.
Okay.
The first year I did it in R, and I think I learned more R doing Advent of Code than I had done up until that point. And I'll tell you why. Advent of Code is a great way to get a very thorough tour of your language. It's going to just ask you to do most of the things that your language can do. And, I came from a data analysis background.
Yeah.
So, doing things like thinking about how to optimize an algorithm to run in a reasonable amount of time, like doing a graph search, was not something I'd ever needed to do in R before.
Yep.
And so, doing it for Advent of Code really, it taught me a lot about the language, and just had me touching different parts that I don't do on a normal daily basis. And I think one of the other things I love about it is the fact that it's these puzzles that lots of people all over the world are doing at the same time.
Yeah. That's cool.
And so there are a ton of resources for it, right? Like you can go online and read and watch videos and read blog posts about it. I actually do a blog series every year with the Advent of Code solutions.
Really?
Mostly, it forces me to write code that other people can read. And so, since I use it for learning a language, I feel like it incentivizes me to try to write it in an idiomatic way and not just like take a bunch of shortcuts.
That makes sense. I always tell people that one of the early lessons that I learned was that if you want to learn something, commit to teaching it to somebody else.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. But no, I love it. I've got a leaderboard. We run a leaderboard for Code Connector. I've got one personally, so folks are welcome to join. I don't do the global leaderboard because it would stress me out too much.
Oh yeah.
The puzzles release at like midnight Eastern time. And if I'm ever writing code at midnight, it's because someone somewhere has done something terribly wrong.
Yeah. I used to write code at midnight Eastern time just because that was the only time I could get the ability to focus. I'd sit down and be ready to go to bed around 10 o'clock, and I'd be like, I'm just going to look at this one thing, and then I'm blinking at 6 a.m. You just get into that.
Oh, man.
You get into that flow.
Yeah.
And because you don't have any messages coming in, there's no phone calls coming in, nothing like that to distract you. You get in the zone. But then I had kids, and that stopped.
Yeah. Right, because they don't care what you did the night before.
Yeah, you're getting up at the same time either way.
Right. Yeah. When it's time to get up, it's time to get up.
Yep. So with Advent of Code, what are you planning on learning this year?
So this year I'm learning Kotlin.
Oh, nice.
Because I don't know anything that I can write on a mobile device. Although I think you can technically do Rust on a mobile device. So that's my reasoning. And it's sort of Java-like. And I know a little bit of Java. And Kotlin is a way for me to feel like I know more Java without actually having to, learn Java.
That's how I feel
There are
about Joe
fewer
Ruby.
factories. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So yeah, so that's my target for this year. You know, kind of I kind of pick a new one every year. So that's
Nice.
we'll see how it goes.
I've only ever heard good things about Kotlin. It's a language
Same.
that has a lot of people that really, really love it, and it's from the bits that I've seen of it. Isn't it like more of a functional Java?
So it's interesting. It has a lot more functional support.
Okay.
Than Java does out of the box. The syntax is a little weird compared to like more purely functional languages.
Yeah.
But it's not anything you can't get your head around pretty quickly. So and I'm looking forward to learning more. And again, it gets a lot of use.
It's been on my list for a while
places.
too, so I'm interested to hear more and find out more. And so, is Advent of Code directed at specific languages, or do you just pick whichever language you want to go with it?
So you can pick whatever language you want. Okay. All the development will be done locally.
Okay.
So you can solve it locally. What I love seeing some folks get very creative with Advent of Code year after year and solve it in very esoteric things like Excel. Actually, or other things like you see some Prolog answers.
Nice.
Which that's a mind bender right there. And yeah, all sorts of things. People, I think I've seen someone who actually wrote their own language to solve Advent of Code problems in. And just like, again, having the huge community working on something at the same time as you is great because you can reach out and, talk to other folks. I do, kind of host conversations about Advent of Code on the Code Connector. We talked about that before.
Yeah.
Because again, it helps encourage folks to jump in and explore their language and do new things. And yeah, it's great. Like you can, complain about the same thing on the same day. It's a good experience.
I like that. I like that a lot. The, what I'm hearing with all the esoteric language solutions is that I need to be looking at Advent of Code to find speakers doing weird things.
Oh, you absolutely could.
See, my goal, I haven't really said this out loud yet, but I'm going to now. One of my goals is I desperately want to have one person at the conference this year give a talk on mainframes.
Oh, wow.
Something related to mainframes, COBOL, whatever else. I feel like it's needed because there's actually a good amount of work still happening in mainframes and people don't realize it. And it'd be great to have somebody come in and talk about, how you solve problems in these languages and how you learn it and how you can get better at it so that you can be qualified to actually apply for any of these positions that are out there. Like I know locally it's even still happening. People using AS400.
Well, I mean, yeah, I learned the other day, and it's one of those things that I feel like I should have known, but I didn't know. Like IBM's still making these things and selling tons of mainframes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's a big story about the story may or may not be true, but there's been a long running story that I think it was one of the big insurance companies will take people on a tour and they will show them a room that is a data center that has a wall-to-wall servers of everything that you would normally use, and they're all off. And then they'll walk you to the next room and they'll show you 3 mainframes and say, we replaced all that with these. And I think it would be really interesting if I can find one of those folks to come in and talk. I think it'd be a good addition to the to our esoteric polyglot conference where we talk about all sorts of random stuff.
I believe it. I would be personally very interested because, again, working with state governments, we often have clients who at least are still running part of their business on a mainframe.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's see. Gosh, I think we've covered. I mean, so you attended the conference this year. How was the experience with that?
Oh, it was absolutely wonderful. I mean,
did you meet a lot of people?
First of all, sir,
did you meet a lot of people?
I met a lot of people, right? And as someone who is very new to the community, that's important to me. So we got to meet people and hang out. Got to throw some axes with the conference organizer.
Yep. He was not very good.
Learned that I'm not very good at that at all.
You get in a
It was
groove with
bad.
it. Like the first 20 minutes, I couldn't hit anything, and then everything that I did just started hitting. You just find that right release point, and it just goes.
That that was very similar to my experience, except 20 minutes was really more like an hour and a half. Eventually, it did start to click. I'll say that. But no, it was a great conference. And again, I mentioned early on, right? Like I submitted a talk, and I mentioned this before we got on. I submitted my talk, and when I got the rejection back, I felt bad about it. And then I saw the announcement of all the speakers that you guys had lined up, and at that point, I was like, you know what? That tracks. That was a good call.
I'm sorry.
The speakers were absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. And I don't. The speaker selection process is really difficult for the conferences in general, and it's difficult for me to farm it out because I know a lot of conferences will bring in a committee to kind of go through the talks and everything. And right now, I'm doing all of it, and the reason that I'm doing all of it is because I've got this weird balance that I'm trying to go for of subject matter across different languages because you want different topics using different languages so that you're not hitting the same thing over and over and over. You don't want too much repetition on the same thing. And like last year I think we had multiple AI related talks submitted. And
Sure. Yeah.
just because it was a popular trending topic that year, and you've got to try to cover the gamut of some of the DevOps related stuff, and I wasn't able to get a security talk in, and that absolutely killed me. Because that's something that I'm very committed to, but it's a weird balance. And the other balance that we're trying to get is you're trying to balance the more experienced speakers with the less experienced speakers, because you want to make sure people are kind of getting their early opportunities to get in and get in front of a crowd and start building that experience up as well. But you also need to make sure that you've got those more experienced speakers as well who can come in and are gonna people are gonna see them on the list and go, I got to go see that. Because it is an interesting balancing act that I stress out way too much about, but I could never give it to anybody else because then I'd be stressed more.
Yeah, no, I feel you. Like delegation is harder than people think it is.
Yes, it is.
For sure.
Yes, it absolutely is.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you had a good time. I'm glad you got to meet a lot of people. I hated sending the rejections also because there were a lot of really good talks submitted. It wasn't like a thing of, oh, well, okay, well, these are clearly the best talks and we're just going to discard everybody else. It was 83 talks and it was 83 good talks. And it was just this wrestling act of going, okay, I put them through like 20 different filters to try to narrow it down myself to try to get things up there. And ultimately, I hate to say it, one of the things that was tough for yours is because your talk was called Falling in Love with Iterators. One of our keynote speakers was giving a talk called Loop. And I didn't want to double up on that topic either. And so, and initially that wasn't the topic he was going to go for. He actually changed his topic after the fact. But I had committed to giving him a slot because he was one of the speakers that I recruited in.
Right. And it was good call on that, by the way.
So I don't do that a lot, but I do that for a little bit of it. And so we were glad to have him in. But yeah, and so in terms of your talk, you posted the talk online, not a video, but your slides are online. I've gone through all the slides and everything, and it was a really well put together presentation. I meant to ask you, what did you use to put it together? Because the whole navigation structure of those slides online was actually really slick. Feel free to do a screen.
Yeah. So what is this? I'm pretty sure, I'll have to check, but I'm pretty sure this is an R package that does that. So it's output to like a static site generator.
Do you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually got it pulled up on the screen just for that.
Perfect.
Let's see here.
You can thank Robert Roskin for this. He made me figure out how to actually incorporate the screen shares with the editing of the videos when he did his podcast interview a couple weeks ago. There we go. Falling in Love with Iterators.
Absolutely.
And so you've got this navigation on the left side to get your little hamburger menu over there where you can jump around and you can go down at different sections of it and kind of get into the nesting and everything. And so this was an R package that did this?
Yes, I believe so. I need to check and make sure because I've, the downside to doing the whole polyglot thing is that I try lots of different things. So sometimes it's different, but I'm pretty sure this is an R package.
Nice.
So one of the benefits of R being, kind of aimed at being an academic language is you get lots of support for producing documents. Of course, websites are just documents. Also like PDFs and Word documents and things like that. So you can, do data stuff and then output a report.
Nice.
Which R is very good for that. And so, yeah, it's good for demonstration. So, and you can, of course, like navigate through. I like pictures in my slideshows because if nothing else, if people are laughing, they're having a good time.
Agreed.
And I don't know that we have to go through the entire talk here unless that's what you want.
No, totally up to you. What inspired you to do this talk in the first place? What made you think, falling in love with iterators is a subject that I feel like we need to share?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I've found, especially in talking about programming languages and having learned a number of them, learned enough to be dangerous. Let's put it that way. Is that there are ideas that are implemented, that are expressed in different programming languages, but they're ideas that sort of transcend the language itself, right? And iterators are really like one of the prime examples of that. It's this idea that you have a thing and you can just ask that thing for values over and over again, and it will give them to you. And how it does that and what that thing is may change from language to language, but the idea of how it works is the same.
Yep.
And one of the things that you get out of using iterators more in your code is you get code that's easier to read and easier to debug. So there's a guy who's much more famous and well known than me, a guy by the name of Sean Parent, who works for Adobe.
Okay.
He's famous for giving a C++ talk where he shares this sort of axiom of no raw loops, right? Where he's encouraging people to use more. C++ has a ton of what they call algorithms in both their standard library and other libraries that are really sort of variations on iterators.
Right.
Really, like you take a list of things, you process it through this algorithm, and you get something out the other end. And of course, his advocacy is that there's probably an algorithm that does whatever you want your loop to do.
Yep.
So you should just use it, right? So because like if you're recreating the loop, there's a chance that you create an error,
yep.
right? And then the other thing is that if there's not already one, you can write your own and you can encapsulate that logic into that iterator, and then you can test it separately. You can ensure that part is doing what you want. You can reuse it in other places, and it makes like the function that you're writing easier to read because you've reduced nesting, and especially in something like C++, which to me is already kind of hard to read.
Yeah,
that's really helpful. And so you get this idea that, you can sort of take code that's like deeply nested in a loop and that you read kind of like SQL sometimes, right? From the inside out, right? Like you go, oh, I have a loop here. And then you read the inside. And if there's another loop in that, like, okay, well, I have to read the inside. And you sort of read that from the inside out. You can write code that reads the way that you're used to reading, at least in English, which is top to bottom, left to right.
Right. That makes sense.
And so I think I have some examples of that in here, if I can find it.
If you're listening on the audio version of this is we've actually got the slides up on the YouTube version of this.
Fantastic! Yeah, so thank you for reminding me that there's an audio version, so I won't like point at the screen. That's a bad idea. But what we're looking at here is
people who are going to see this part of the presentation. They're going to come to YouTube and take a look at it, I'm sure. But just do your best to express.
Fantastic. What we're looking at here is an iterator in Rust that we're using to run lengthen code some list, right? And it could be a list of whatever. That's what all the T's and the I's, if you're looking at the screen, those are all generics,
right?
But this idea that you can go over. So if you have A, B, B, C, you would get out the other end like A3, B2, C1, right? And it's like a compression thing. And you might want to write your own iterator to do that. And so the actual implementation of the iterator, like as you're looking at it, and especially if you're not familiar with with Rust, looks a little bit gnarly. But at the end, and this like walks through, let me,
I
right.
really
But at
love this
the end, you
presentation setup. Just again, for the record, whatever you use to make this, it's really, really slick.
I'm a fan. But what you get at the end, right? Like we're looking now at a function that uses that run length encoding. And you can see we've got a string. It's got a bunch of letters in it. And the way we call it is we have our string. We convert that string to a list of characters using this chars function. And then we run length encode it, right? So like here in this function, it is extremely clear what we're doing to this input. And if you want to know how run length encoding works, right, like you can always go back and read the iterator implementation.
Right.
But if you just want to use it, which 90% of the time, right, that's what you're doing, then you just use it, right? Maybe you read the documentation for how it works, but you don't have to write that loop yourself. And if you're coming to this code, trying to, maybe do some refactoring, maybe pay off some tech debt, it's extremely, it's easier to read and it's easier to work with. So, that's kind of the idea, is that using iterators can really make your code much nicer. And I point out in the presentation too that iterators are typically the data structure in your language that's underlying your for loops. In a lot of cases, right? It's your for loop is really like syntactic sugar around an iterator. And so the nice thing about that is you can write your iterators and then you can for loop over them, right? You could say for character pair in run length encode, do these sorts of things. And so, it even makes writing your for loops a little bit easier. Now, some languages, it makes it easier than others. So I think I've got like an example here in Java. That's still a little bit hard to deal with.
I want to see that in Kotlin after admin of code.
I know. You know what? That's probably going to be my new example. Unless it's actually really nice, in which case I'm going to leave the Java version in here just to, dunk on Java a little bit. But yeah, so it's one of those things that I'm often, especially again on Code Connector, when I'm working with newer people coming into the language, pointing out some of the ways that they can use the way that the language works that seems like magic. Just sort of demystifying some of that, being like, I know for loops seem like magic. They're not. Here's how they really work, right? In whatever language you're using, and it's different in JavaScript and in Java and in Julia and in Rust. Julia is interesting. You don't actually write your own data structure for iterators in Julia. You just write a function, and one of the return values from that function is whatever your iterator data structure is.
Oh, interesting.
It's kind of a weird way to do it. It takes a little while to get your head around, but
I remember the first
works.
thing that really blew my mind with iterators that made it really sink in was when somebody showed me basically an array of values, and then they showed me a range iterator, where rather than filling out an array with values 1 through 1,000,000, you've got 3 values. You've got a min value, a max value, and an increment by this amount, and it's just giving you the next one without having to fill all that space up in memory. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. I now understand iterators.
Right. Yeah. So instead of doing that logic yourself and populating memory and then iterating over it, which, again, most languages I've encountered, it still creates an iterator for you to do that. Yeah. You can just I just want to add one every time.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so, there's a lot of benefits you get out of that. And then of course, as people move more toward functional styles of programming, that has certainly become more popular recently.
Oh, definitely.
Iterators plug just straight into that in those languages that support it.
Yep. A lot of recursion too.
A lot of recursion.
Yep. All right. Well, we are just about at time. Anything else you want to close out with?
I think the last thing that I will say, and it's a thing that I again, I mentioned I work with Code Connector and working with people who are coming into technology. You know, one thing that I point out to, especially folks who are coming in and asking, like, how do I get started? How do I start a career in tech? The first answer that you get 9 times out of 10 is, oh, you can come be a web developer, right? You can come learn JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and you can do that. And you absolutely can.
Yep.
There's a big market for that. If that's what calls to you, go do it. But if my experiences, excuse me,
You're good.
should have preempted that one. But if my experiences in my career path have taught me anything, it is that there is technology out there for everyone.
Yeah.
To do the thing that you love doing with technology, and to make a career of it that you can enjoy. I would be a very miserable web developer, and I'd probably be miserable at it. But being able to do the kind of work I've done has really helped. So if you're looking, if you're one of those folks who's thinking about how do I get into tech, or I'm too old to get into tech, or I've already started this career, I need to finish it, but you're still interested, I encourage you to just find people who are already doing things that you're interested in. They're out there.
Yeah.
There's you haven't plugged it, but there's a great Hack Greenville Slack out there.
Yeah.
With lots of really friendly people on it. I do more lurking than anything else there, but the folks there are great. We've got Code Connect. You got folks all over there. There's a lot of accessibility into this tech community.
A lot of very helpful people,
and a lot of really helpful people who are more than happy to talk to you. So come hang out, chat. Maybe get a better feel before you dive into a boot camp or something like that. And I promise, you'll likely have a better experience.
Yeah, it's
so
a big
that's sort
wide
of my
world.
plug.
It's a big wide world of tech, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I've got to give my usual shout out to Herd Media. Thank y'all for helping to coach me through doing this podcast and learning my way through all the various editing pieces that we're doing here. So if you've got a professional podcast that needs to be done, folks over at Herd Media can help you get it together and publish it every week and take all the hard work off your hands. And so they're right here in Greenville as well. So Eric, thanks again for coming on. This has been the Carolina Codecast.
Thank you.